Nora Whitfield was on her knees in the dirt, pressing a blood-soaked cloth against a dying cowboy's chest when Gideon Mercer raised his rifle and gave her one choice. "Walk away from him," he growled, "or you walk off this ranch with him." Nora looked at the stranger's pale face. She looked at the only home she had left. Then she made the decision that would cost her everything. "If he dies because I refuse to help him," she whispered, "I'll never forgive myself." Gideon lowered the rifle. "Then pack your things." What Nora didn't know was that the bleeding cowboy she had just chosen over her own livelihood wasn't a poor drifter at all. He was Ethan Calloway, a millionaire. And the ranch owner Gideon feared more than anyone alive. Before we go further, subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello and know just how far our story is traveling tonight. The Mercer Ranch sat on 800 acres of cracked Texas soil, and every one of those acres seemed determined to remind Nora Whitfield that she did not belong there. She was 21 years old, and she had spent 4 of those years working from before sunrise until long after the last lamp was blown out. She hauled water. She mended fences. She fed cattle that were not hers and slept in a room that was not truly hers either, though Gideon Mercer liked to remind her, whenever her wages fell short, that she should be grateful he let her sleep there at all. Gideon owned the ranch the way some men own a debt they intend to collect forever. He was 60 years old, gray at the temples, and hard in every place a man could be hard. The drought that summer had turned his cattle thin and his temper thinner. He blamed the sky. He blamed his workers. He never once blamed himself. Nora had learned to survive him the way a person learns to survive a Texas winter, by keeping her head down and her opinions quiet. She had a small talent for it, an ability to disappear into her chores so completely that Gideon sometimes forgot she was there at all. Margaret used to joke that Nora could vanish into a broom the way other girls vanished into a crowd, and there had been a strange comfort in that, in being small enough to avoid notice. She kept a garden behind the bunkhouse where nothing much would grow in that dry season except a stubborn row of sunflowers, and in the evenings she liked to sit beside them and read from her grandfather's Bible until the light went too dim to see the words. It was a small ritual, but it was hers, and on a ranch where almost nothing belonged to her, that mattered more than she ever said out loud. But on the evening everything changed. Keeping quiet was not something she was able to do. She was walking back from the well when she saw him. A man lay crumpled near the fence line, one arm bent wrong, his shirt dark and wet where it should have been dry. She dropped her bucket and ran. His face was cut and swollen. His breathing came in short, uneven pulls. She pressed her hand against the wound in his side and felt the warmth of his blood soak through her fingers. "Stay with me," she said. "Whoever you are, stay with me." His eyes opened, just barely. Gray eyes, sharp even through the pain. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he cannot quite believe is real. "Who are you?" he managed. "Nora," she said. "You're on Mercer land. I'm going to get help." "No," he said, gripping her wrist with more strength than his condition should have allowed. "Not the owner. Please." She did not understand why a dying man would fear the one person who could save him, but there was no time to ask. She tore a strip from her apron and pressed it to his side, and she called out toward the barn for anyone who would listen. Thomas, one of the younger hands, came running first. Together they carried the stranger into the barn, laid him on a bed of clean straw, and Nora went to work the way her grandfather had taught her, cleaning what could be cleaned, binding what could be bound, praying over the rest. The stranger told her his name was Ethan. Nothing more. He said it like a man testing whether the ground beneath him could be trusted. "Why help me?" he asked, his voice rough, "when you don't know me at all?" "Because my grandfather taught me that a person's life is worth helping, whether you know their name or not," Nora answered. "He used to say a man who only helps people he already knows isn't really kind. He's just careful." Ethan studied her for a long moment, and something in his tired eyes shifted, though Nora could not have said what. Your grandfather sounds like a rare kind of man, he said. He was, she said softly. He's gone now. But I try to live the way he raised me. What else did he teach you? Ethan asked, and though his voice was weak, there was real curiosity in it, the kind that did not belong to a man simply passing the time until the pain eased. He taught me how to read a sky before a storm, Nora said, wringing a cloth out in the basin beside her. How to set a broken fence post so it holds through a hard winter. How to shoot straight, though I've never had much cause to. Mostly he taught me that a person's worth isn't decided by how much they own. That's a rare lesson in this part of the country, Ethan said. Most men out here measure worth in cattle and acreage. Most men out here would be poorer for it, if they only knew, Nora said, and for the first time that night, a small smile crossed her tired face. Ethan laughed softly, though it clearly took some effort, and the sound of it surprised her. Nothing about that night should have left room for laughter, and yet here it was. Outside, the barn door creaked, and Nora felt the evening's peace end before it had truly begun. Gideon Mercer filled the barn doorway with lamp light behind him and fury in front of him. What is this, he said, though it was not a question. He's hurt bad, Nora said, rising to her feet. He needs a doctor. He needs to be off my land, Gideon said. I don't know him. I don't want to know him. And I am not spending medicine, food, or water on a stranger who could bring his troubles right through my front gate. He'll die if we move him tonight, Nora said. Then he dies somewhere that isn't my problem. Margaret, the ranch cook, appeared behind Gideon with a bundle of clean cloth already in her arms, saying nothing, but standing close enough that Nora understood whose side she was on. Thomas hovered near the stall door, torn between the instinct to help and the fear that had kept him quiet on this ranch for years. A dying stranger isn't worth a day's wages, Nora, Gideon said. You've worked here long enough to know how I run things. I know how you run things, Nora said, and for the first time in 4 years, she let her voice carry the anger she usually swallowed. You'd let a man bleed out in your barn to save the cost of a bandage. Gideon's jaw tightened. Careful. I won't leave him, Nora said. Then you leave, Gideon said. Pack your things. You're finished here. The words landed harder than she expected, even though she had known they were coming from the moment she chose to speak. She looked around the barn that had been the closest thing to home she'd had since her grandfather passed, and she felt the floor of her whole life tilt beneath her. But she looked down at Ethan, at the wound she had only just closed, and she knew she would not have made a different choice even if she had seen this coming from a mile away. Then I'll go, she said. But I won't go quietly knowing I let a man die out of convenience. Gideon turned and walked out without another word, which frightened her more than shouting would have. Margaret pressed the bundle of cloth into Nora's hands and squeezed her fingers once, a silent promise that she would help however she could. Thomas would not meet Nora's eyes, but he lingered near the door long enough that Nora understood he was ashamed of his own fear. That night, Nora sat beside Ethan and watched the rise and fall of his breathing, counting each breath like a small, stubborn victory. She had lost her home in a single evening. She did not yet understand that she had also, without knowing it, changed the whole direction of her life. Margaret found a spare moment near midnight to slip back into the barn with a cup of broth for the stranger and a look on her face that told Nora she had already made her peace with what had happened. You did right, Margaret said simply, setting the cup down beside the straw. Gideon will forget his own name before he forgets being told no in front of his men. But you did right. Doesn't feel like it, Nora admitted. Feels like I've made myself homeless over a man I met an hour ago. Sometimes right and easy don't travel the same road, Margaret said, and she squeezed Nora's shoulder before disappearing back toward the main house, leaving Nora alone again with the lantern light and the slow, steady breathing of the man she had chosen to save. By midnight, Ethan's breathing had steadied. Color had returned to his face, faint but real. Nora sat cross-legged in the straw beside him, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders, refusing to let herself sleep until she was certain he would live through the night. "You didn't have to stay," Ethan said quietly, startling her. "Not after what it cost you." "I wasn't going to leave you here alone to see if you made it," Nora said. He was quiet for a while, watching the lantern light flicker against the barn's wooden beams. "Tell me about your family," he said finally. "You mentioned a grandfather." "Samuel Whitfield," Nora said, and saying his name in the dark barn felt like lighting a small fire against the cold. "He raised me after my parents died. He served in the cavalry when he was young. He used to say the man who taught him the most about courage wasn't a general. It was a soldier he pulled out of a burning supply wagon during an ambush, a man he'd never met before that night." Ethan went very still. "Did your grandfather ever say the man's name?" he asked. "No," Nora said, surprised by the question. "Why does that matter to you?" "It doesn't," Ethan said too quickly. "I only wondered." Nora studied him. There was something in the way he asked, something careful and deliberate that did not match a man who claimed to be nothing more than a drifter passing through. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who won't answer any of mine," she said. Ethan almost smiled. "Fair enough. Who did this to you?" she asked. "Men who didn't want me asking questions of my own," he said, and though his voice was calm, something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "On this ranch?" He did not answer. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, taking in the exhaustion on her face, the dirt under her fingernails, the quiet dignity she carried even now, having lost everything in a single night. "You deserve better than what this place has given you," he said. Nora laughed, though there was little humor in it. "I don't have the luxury of deserving things, Ethan. I have the luxury of surviving them." "That may change sooner than you think," he said. "You speak like a man who's used to being obeyed," Nora said, studying him carefully. "Drifters don't usually talk that way." "Bad habit," Ethan said, and there was the faintest trace of humor beneath the exhaustion in his voice. "I'll try to leave it at the door on my way out." "See that you do," Nora said, and despite everything, despite the ache in her back and the uncertainty hanging over her future, she found herself almost smiling. "This barn only has room for one stubborn person tonight, and I already filled the position." Ethan's mouth curved, just slightly, before his eyes drifted closed again, sleep finally pulling him under. Nora sat beside him a while longer, listening to the wind push against the barn walls, and though she did not understand what his careful words meant, they settled into her chest and stayed there, a small ember of hope she did not yet trust herself to believe. Dawn came gray and unwilling, the way it often did in a drought summer. Nora climbed to the loft she had called her own for 4 years and packed what little she owned into a canvas bag. 2 dresses. A pair of boots gone soft at the heel. Her grandfather's small leather Bible, its cover cracked from years of handling. Margaret met her at the bottom of the ladder with a bundle of bread and dried meat wrapped in cloth. "Take it," Margaret said, pressing it into Nora's hands before she could refuse. "You'll need your strength on the road." Thomas carried her bag as far as the gate, quiet the whole way, until finally he spoke. "I should have said something last night," he admitted. "I was afraid." "I know," Nora said, and she meant it without bitterness. "Fear makes cowards of good people sometimes. It doesn't make them bad people forever." Gideon was waiting at the gate, arms crossed, watching her leave with an expression that held no regret at all. "You threw away 4 years for a man you don't even know," he said. "I didn't throw anything away," Nora answered. "You're the one who decided a stranger's life wasn't worth a day's wages. I only decided mine was worth more than staying somewhere that thinks that way." Gideon's face reddened, but before he could respond, Nora had already walked past him, through the gate, and onto the dry road that led toward town. She did not look back. The walk was long, and the sun was unkind, but her grandfather's voice kept her company the whole way. "A house built on fear is not a home," he used to tell her. "It is only a prison with better furniture." She had spent 4 years inside Gideon Mercer's prison, telling herself it was safety. Walking away from it, exhausted and penniless, felt strangely like the first deep breath she had taken in years. By midday the heat pressed down on her like a hand, and her feet had begun to ache inside her worn boots. She stopped once beneath the thin shade of a mesquite tree to eat a small portion of the bread Margaret had given her, rationing it carefully, unsure how many days it would need to last. A wagon passed her on the road, driven by an older farmer she did not recognize. He slowed long enough to offer her a ride into town, and though her feet begged her to accept, something in her hesitated. She had learned, over 4 hard years, to be careful about which kindnesses were free and which ones came with a price attached later. "I don't have much to offer in return," she said honestly. "Didn't ask for anything," the farmer said, and there was no unkindness in his eyes, only a plain, uncomplicated decency that Nora had almost forgotten existed outside of Margaret's kitchen. "Climb up. Son's no friend to a person walking alone." She rode the last 2 miles into town in the back of his wagon, grateful for the small mercy, and it struck her, somewhere along that dusty road, that not every person in this world measured kindness the way Gideon Mercer did. She thought of Ethan, of the strange careful way he asked about her grandfather, of the warning in his voice when he told her that things might change soon. She did not know what any of it meant. She only knew that helping him had cost her a roof over her head, and that she would make the same choice again without hesitation. While Nora walked the dusty road toward town, Ethan Calloway was doing something Gideon Mercer would never have expected from a half-dead drifter. He was working. A man named Daniel Price arrived at the edge of Mercer Land 2 days later, dressed like a city clerk and carrying a leather case full of documents. He found Ethan resting in a small line shack a mile off the property, healing faster than any ordinary man should. "You look like hell," Daniel said. "I feel worse," Ethan replied. "What did you find?" Daniel spread the papers across a rough wooden table. "Missing cattle. Dozens of head, sold off the books over the last 2 years. Ownership records that don't match county filings. And workers who've been paid in promises instead of wages more times than anyone's willing to admit out loud." Ethan studied the pages carefully. He had come to this stretch of Texas as Ethan Calloway, cattle and railroad investor, quietly investigating rumors that had reached his office months earlier, rumors of a rancher cheating his neighbors, his workers, and the banks that backed him. He had not expected the investigation to nearly cost him his life. He had not expected to be saved by a young woman with nothing to gain and everything to lose. "Sheriff Owen Harper has suspected something was wrong out here for a long time," Daniel added. "He's never had the evidence to move on it." "Then let's get him the evidence," Ethan said. Back on the ranch, a lean, watchful man named Caleb had begun asking questions of his own. He worked for Gideon, and he had a talent for noticing things other men missed. He noticed that the drifter who had collapsed near the fence line had vanished without a trace the next morning. He noticed that no ordinary drifter healed that fast, or disappeared that cleanly. He began to search for answers, and every answer he found made Gideon Mercer more nervous than the one before it. "Someone's been asking about our cattle counts," Caleb told Gideon one evening. "Find out who," Gideon said. "And find out what they know." Gideon tried to laugh the worry off in front of his men, boasting over supper that no clerk with a leather case could touch a man who had run this valley for 20 years. But later, alone in his study, he pulled his ledgers from the bottom drawer and studied the numbers by candlelight, and the numbers did not comfort him the way they once had. He thought of the drifter who had vanished from his barn without a trace, healed far too quickly for a man who should have been half dead, and a cold unease settled over him that no amount of bluster could shake. For the first time in years, the man who had built his reputation on control began to feel the ground shifting beneath him, and he did not yet know why. Finding work in town proved harder than Nora expected. She applied at the general store, the boarding house, the laundry, and each time she was met with the same uncomfortable hesitation, a look that told her word of her dismissal had traveled faster than she had. I heard you crossed Gideon Mercer, the boarding house owner said, not unkindly, but firmly. I can't afford to make an enemy of him. Nora understood then that Gideon had not simply fired her. He had made certain no one else would hire her either. She refused to let it break her. She took in mending. She helped an elderly widow with her garden in exchange for meals. It was not much, but it was honest, and it was hers. One afternoon, while gathering supplies near the edge of town, she overheard two ranch hands discussing a cattle shipment that did not match what she remembered from her years working the Mercer books. She said nothing, only listened, but Caleb noticed her nearby and did not like what he saw. He found her later on the road back to the widow's house, blocking her path with his horse. You're asking questions you shouldn't be asking, he said. I haven't asked anyone anything, Nora replied. Then keep it that way, Caleb said. Gideon doesn't like loose ends, and right now, you're looking like one. That night, Thomas found her at the edge of town, his voice low and urgent. You need to be careful, he said. Caleb's been asking about you. About the drifter too. Something's happening on that ranch, and I don't think it has anything to do with cattle. Nora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She thought of Ethan's strange questions about her grandfather, his warning that things might change, the careful way he had avoided explaining who he truly was. She began to wonder if his arrival at the Mercer ranch had been an accident at all, or if she had stumbled into something far larger than a dying stranger by the fence line. She confided her worries to the elderly widow she had been helping, a sharp-tongued woman named Ruth who had buried 2 husbands and outlived every man foolish enough to underestimate her. Sounds to me like you saved yourself a mystery instead of a corpse, Ruth said, snapping beans into a bowl on her porch. Men like that Mercer fellow don't send their foreman chasing after nothing. You've got something he's afraid of, even if you don't know what it is yet. I don't have anything, Nora said. I don't even have a place to sleep that isn't your spare room. You've got memory, Ruth said. And memory is the one thing a guilty man can never buy back. She pointed a bean at Nora for emphasis, and despite the fear knotting in her stomach, Nora found herself laughing for the first time in days. Ruth had a way of making even danger sound almost manageable, and Nora was grateful for it, even as Caleb's warning echoed in the back of her mind long after the sun went down. 3 weeks after she had been thrown off the ranch, Nora found herself on a lonely stretch of road as evening fell, with Caleb and 2 other men closing in around her, their intentions clear in the way they spread out to block every direction she might run. You should have kept walking, girl, Caleb said. Instead you keep sniffing around where you don't belong. I haven't done anything, Nora said, standing her ground even as her heart pounded against her ribs. Doesn't matter, Caleb said. Boss wants you gone from this town entirely. The sound of hoofbeats broke the tense silence, several riders approaching fast along the road. Caleb's men turned, and Nora turned with them, expecting more trouble. What she saw instead stole the breath from her lungs. Ethan sat tall in the saddle, dressed not in torn, bloodied clothes, but in a fine dark coat and pressed shirt that spoke of wealth she had never imagined a drifter could possess. Daniel Price rode beside him, along with 2 other men she did not recognize. Ethan's face, healed now and sharp with authority, carried none of the helplessness she remembered from that night in the barn. That's far enough, Ethan said, and his voice carried an easy, unmistakable command that made Caleb's men hesitate. This isn't your business, Caleb said, though the confidence had drained from his voice. Everything happening on land I own is my business, Ethan said calmly. And you 3 are trespassing on my patience. Caleb's face went pale. Your land. Mercer's debts came due faster than he expected, Ethan said. I now hold controlling interest in that ranch, and every soul working it, including you, answers to me. The men backed their horses away, and within moments, they were gone, leaving Nora standing in the road, staring at the man she had bandaged with her own 2 hands in a dark barn 3 weeks earlier. You, she managed. You're not just Ethan. No, he said, dismounting and crossing the distance between them slowly, as though he understood how much this moment was rearranging everything she thought she knew. My full name is Ethan Calloway. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth sooner. They sat together that evening at a small table inside the boarding house, and for the first time since she had found him bleeding by the fence, Ethan told Nora the whole truth. I'm an investor, he said. Cattle, railroads, land. My family has been building this business for 2 generations. Months ago, reports reached me that Gideon Mercer was cheating his workers, falsifying his cattle counts, and defrauding the bank that financed half his operation. I came to investigate quietly. I didn't expect his men to catch on so fast, or to leave me bleeding by your fence line. You could have told me, Nora said, though the anger in her voice was softer than she expected. I sat with you all night not knowing if you'd live to see morning. I know, Ethan said. And I've thought about that more than you might believe. I didn't know who I could trust on that ranch. Everyone there answered to Gideon in one way or another. I didn't help you because I thought you had money, Nora said. I helped you because you were dying, and that was enough of a reason for me. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, something that looked almost like relief. That's exactly why I couldn't stop thinking about you these last 3 weeks, he admitted. In my world, people are kind to me because of what I can give them. You were kind to me when I had nothing to offer but trouble. Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she looked down at her hands rather than meet his eyes. The first time I saw you, Ethan said quietly, you were saving my life. The second time, I knew I wanted to spend mine making sure you never had to beg anyone for kindness again. Nora looked up at him then, and the careful distance she had kept between herself and hope for so long began, slowly, to give way. I don't know what to do with a sentence like that, she admitted, a small smile breaking through despite herself. You don't have to know yet, Ethan said. We have time now. Outside, the lamps of the town flickered on one by one against the falling dusk, and for a long while neither of them spoke, content simply to sit together without the weight of secrets pressing between them. Ethan reached across the small table and rested his hand over hers, careful, as though asking permission without needing to say the words. Nora did not pull away. I should warn you, she said eventually, breaking the comfortable quiet, I still don't know a thing about railroads or investments. Good, Ethan said. I have enough people around me who only know about railroads and investments. I'd rather have one who knows how to set a splint in the dark without flinching. That's a strange thing to find charming in a person, Nora said. Maybe, Ethan said. But I've never claimed to be an ordinary man. No, Nora agreed, smiling despite herself. I suppose you haven't. 2 days later, Ethan asked Nora to walk with him along the edge of town, and what he told her changed the shape of everything she thought she understood about her own family. Your grandfather, he said. Sergeant Samuel Whitfield. I need to tell you why his name mattered so much to me that first night. Nora's breath caught. How do you know his name? Because my father owes him his life, Ethan said. During the war, my father, James Calloway, was among the wounded men trapped in a supply wagon during an ambush. Your grandfather stayed behind when every order told him to retreat. He held the line in freezing snow and saved 30 men that night, including my father. Tears gathered in Nora's eyes before she could stop them. He never told me the names of the men he saved. He only ever said it was the right thing to do. My family never forgot the debt, Ethan said. I've spent years trying to find Samuel Whitfield's family, to thank them properly, to repay what could never truly be repaid. When I heard you speak his name in that barn, I understood exactly who you were within seconds. That's why you came to Mercer's ranch, Nora said slowly. Not just for the investigation. The investigation was real, Ethan said. But finding you was something I never expected, and something I will always be grateful for. Nora wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of a kindness her grandfather had shown decades before she was born, a kindness that had somehow reached forward through time to change her life all over again. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything," she said carefully. "I don't want to be a debt someone is settling." "You're not a debt," Ethan said firmly. "You're the reason I believe kindness still means something in this world. I want to build something with you, Nora. Not repay you. Build with you. Then let me choose my own future," Nora said. "Not one you hand to me because of what my grandfather did." Ethan looked at her with something close to admiration. "That's fair," he said. "And it's exactly why I know you're the right person to help me finish what I came here to do." They walked in silence for a while after that, the evening settling gold and quiet around them, and Ethan found himself watching her more than the road ahead. There was a steadiness to Nora Whitfield that no amount of money in his family's accounts had ever been able to purchase, a kind of quiet strength that made every calculated decision in his ordinary life feel small by comparison. "Can I ask you something else?" Nora said. "Anything. When this is over, when Gideon has answered for everything he's done, what happens to you? Do you go back to your railroads and your offices and forget this valley ever existed?" Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "No," he said, without a moment's hesitation. "I don't think I could forget this valley if I tried. Not anymore." Something warm moved through Nora's chest at those words, something she was not yet ready to name out loud, but she did not need to. The look on her face said enough. With Daniel Price's evidence and Ethan's legal authority, Sheriff Owen Harper finally had what he needed to act. Gideon Mercer's falsified cattle counts, his fraudulent ownership claims, and years of unpaid wages were laid bare before the county in a matter of weeks. Caleb, hoping to save himself, admitted under questioning that Gideon had ordered him to intimidate Nora and silence anyone who asked too many questions. Thomas, finally free of the fear that had kept him quiet for years, spoke honestly about what he had witnessed on the ranch, from the night Nora was fired to the threats that followed her afterward. Gideon's empire, built on cruelty and control, collapsed in the space of a single court hearing. The ranch was legally transferred into Ethan's ownership, and the town that once feared Gideon Mercer's name watched him leave with nothing but the clothes on his back. Everyone assumed Ethan would simply run the ranch himself. Instead, he gathered the workers, Margaret, Thomas, and the others who had stayed loyal through fear and hardship, and made an announcement that stunned the whole gathering. "This ranch will be run by someone who understands what it actually needs," Ethan said, looking directly at Nora. "Not obedience. Not fear. Someone who understands that people are worth more than profit." He offered her a full ownership stake in the ranch that had once thrown her into the dirt for the crime of showing mercy. "You saved a dying stranger when you had nothing," Ethan said. "You protected someone who could give you nothing in return at the time. You understood what this land needed before I ever set foot on it. It belongs with you." Nora stood in stunned silence, looking out over the land that had once been the site of her greatest humiliation. She thought of her grandfather, of the lesson he had spent a lifetime teaching her about the true worth of a person's character. "I accept," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. The woman Gideon Mercer had once thrown off his land now stood as the person who would decide its future, and there was a quiet, powerful justice in that moment that no amount of Gideon's old money could ever undo. Epilogue: The home she never had. Months passed, and the ranch began to heal alongside the people who worked it. Wages were paid fairly and on time. Thomas grew more confident with each season, no longer the frightened young man who had once been too afraid to speak up. Margaret remained close to Nora, more family now than employer and employee had ever been. Sheriff Owen Harper checked in from time to time, though he rarely found reason to worry anymore. Ethan spent more and more of his time at the ranch, until eventually, his visits stopped feeling like visits at all. One evening, as the sun sank low and gold over the same fence line where she had once found him bleeding and barely alive, Nora teased him about the state she had first found him in. "You looked half dead," she said. "I thought I was going to lose you before I even learned your name." Getting thrown from that horse was the best thing that ever happened to me, Ethan said, laughing. I came here looking for evidence of fraud. Instead, I found you. Not for a second, Nora said, watching the last color drain slowly from the sky. Everything that led me to this life was worth every hard mile. She laughed softly, and the sound carried across the yard where Thomas was closing up the barn for the night and Margaret stood on the porch shelling peas into a bowl, humming some old tune Nora's grandfather used to hum on quiet evenings just like this one. Ethan took her hand, and together they looked out over the land that had once cast her out for the simple act of choosing compassion over convenience. It was the same dry earth, the same weathered fences, the same wide Texas sky. But it did not feel the same at all. It felt like home. Margaret called them both in for supper before the light disappeared completely, and Ethan laughed as Nora tugged him toward the house, teasing him about a millionaire who had never once, in all his fine education, learned how to properly shell a pea. He protested that railroads did not require vegetable skills, and she told him that a ranch most certainly did, and their laughter followed them all the way to the porch steps, echoing across land that had finally, after everything, become exactly what her grandfather always said a home should be. Sometimes the decision that costs you everything is the very decision that leads you to the life you were always meant to have. Nora Whitfield lost a job, a roof, and the only security she had ever known, all because she refused to let a stranger die alone in the dark. What she gained in return was a home built on respect instead of fear, exactly the kind her grandfather always said was the only kind worth having. If this story moved you, subscribe to see how many more journeys like Nora's are still ahead, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I would love nothing more than to say hello and see just how far this story has traveled to reach you.